The concrete floor was cold beneath Charlie's tired paws as he lay in the corner of the small kennel. 9 years had passed since he first arrived at the animal shelter, and the old golden retriever had watched countless dogs come and go. Puppies with bright eyes and wagging tails found homes within days. Young, energetic dogs caught the attention of families looking for adventure companions. But Charlie remained. His once golden coat had turned gray around his muzzle, and his movements had slowed considerably. The shelter staff had grown fond of him over the years, but potential adopters always seemed to look past the senior dog. They wanted something younger, more playful, something that would last longer. Charlie had learned not to get his hopes up when people walked through the adoption area. Sarah Martinez had been working at the Riverside Animal Shelter for 3 years, but she had never seen a dog stay as long as Charlie. Every morning when she arrived for her shift, she would find him in the same position, lying quietly with his head resting on his front paws. Unlike other dogs who barked and jumped when people approached, Charlie had learned that silence often meant being overlooked rather than chosen. The shelter operated on a tight budget, and resources were limited. Dogs received basic care, food, water, and necessary medical attention, but extras like toys were rare luxuries. The few donated toys that came in were usually given to the younger dogs who showed more interest in playing. Charlie had never shown much enthusiasm for anything, so the staff assumed he simply wasn't interested in toys or games. Dr. Emily Chen, the shelter's part-time veterinarian, had examined Charlie numerous times over the years. Despite his age, he remained in relatively good health. His joints were a bit stiff, and he moved more slowly than he once did. But there were no serious medical conditions preventing him from being adopted. The problem wasn't his health. It was simply that people preferred younger animals. During quiet moments at the shelter, Sarah often wondered about Charlie's life before he arrived. He had been brought in as a stray with no collar or identification. There were no records of his previous owners, no clues about whether he had ever experienced the joy of having a family or playing with toys. His calm, resigned demeanor suggested he had learned to expect very little from life. The other dogs in the shelter formed temporary friendships, playing together during outdoor time and sharing moments of excitement when volunteers came to visit. But Charlie kept to himself, observing from a distance. He seemed to have accepted his fate as a permanent resident, neither hoping for more nor complaining about his circumstances. Volunteers who worked with the dogs often commented on Charlie's gentle nature. He never showed aggression, never fought over food, and never caused trouble. He was the perfect dog in many ways, yet somehow that very perfection worked against him. People seemed drawn to animals with more personality, more energy, more obvious signs of life and enthusiasm. As seasons changed outside the shelter windows, Charlie's routine remained the same. Morning feeding, a brief walk in the exercise yard, afternoon rest, evening meal, and then sleep. Day after day, month after month, year after year. The predictability had become his comfort, even as it highlighted the emptiness of his existence. Sarah began to notice small details about Charlie that others missed. The way his ears perked up slightly when children's laughter echoed from the street outside. How his tail would give the tiniest wag when she spoke directly to him during feeding time. These subtle signs suggested that somewhere inside the resigned exterior, there was still a spark of the dog he once might have been. The reality of shelter life was that long-term residents like Charlie became part of the furniture. New staff members learned to work around him, but they rarely saw him as a priority. His kennel was clean, his basic needs were met, and he caused no problems. In the busy world of animal rescue, where crises demanded immediate attention, a quiet, well-behaved senior dog could easily be forgotten. But Charlie hadn't always been this way. Deep in his memory were fragments of another life, though the details had grown hazy with time. There had been warmth once and voices that spoke kindly to him. There had been soft places to sleep and hands that petted him gently. Those memories felt like dreams now, so distant that he sometimes wondered if they had ever been real. The truth was that Charlie had given up hoping for change. Hope had been too painful to maintain year after year. It was easier to accept his circumstances and find small comforts in the routine. The concrete floor was hard, but it was familiar. The kennel was small, but it was safe. This was his life now, and he had learned to make peace with it even as something deep inside him continued to wait for something he couldn't quite remember or name. Rebecca Walsh pushed through the heavy doors of the Riverside Animal Shelter, on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. At 62, she had recently retired from her job as an elementary school teacher and was looking for ways to fill her newly empty days. Volunteering with animals seemed like the perfect solution to combat the loneliness that had crept into her life since her husband's passing the previous year. Sarah Martinez greeted Rebecca warmly and began the orientation tour. They walked through the adoption areas, past kennels filled with dogs of various sizes and ages. Most of the animals rushed to the front of their enclosures, eager for attention and hoping to make a connection with the newcomer. Rebecca smiled and spoke gently to each one, her heart already breaking for these forgotten souls. Then they reached the last kennel in the row, where Charlie lay motionless in his usual spot. Sarah's voice took on a different tone as she explained his situation. 9 years in the shelter had made him something of a legend among the staff, though not necessarily in a good way. He represented their greatest failure, the dog they couldn't find a home for despite their best efforts. Rebecca stopped walking and really looked at Charlie, while Sarah continued talking about adoption procedures and volunteer responsibilities. Rebecca studied the old dog's face. She saw something that others had missed or perhaps forgotten to see. Behind those tired eyes was an intelligence and gentleness that spoke to her teacher's instincts. She had spent decades recognizing potential in overlooked students, and she recognized it now in this forgotten dog. When Sarah finished the tour and handed Rebecca her volunteer schedule, Rebecca made an unusual request. Instead of being assigned to the general population of dogs, she asked to spend her volunteer time specifically with Charlie. Sarah seemed surprised but didn't object. Few volunteers showed interest in the senior dogs, and Charlie certainly needed the attention, even if it seemed unlikely to lead to adoption. Rebecca's first official day as a volunteer began with her sitting quietly outside Charlie's kennel. She didn't try to force interaction or overwhelm him with enthusiasm. Instead, she simply talked to him in the same gentle voice she had once used with shy students. She told him about her day, about the weather, about anything that came to mind. Charlie listened with what seemed like polite attention, though he remained in his corner. Over the following weeks, Rebecca established a routine with Charlie. She would arrive each Tuesday and Thursday morning, settle into a folding chair beside his kennel, and simply spend time with him. Sometimes she read aloud from books she brought from home. Other times she worked on crossword puzzles while providing a running commentary that seemed to amuse the old dog, judging by the occasional twitch of his ears. Gradually, Charlie began to show small signs of interest in his new companion. He would lift his head when she arrived, and his tail would give the slightest movement when she spoke his name. These tiny changes filled Rebecca with hope, though she was careful not to expect too much too quickly. She understood that trust, once broken or never properly formed, took time to rebuild. During her third week of volunteering, Rebecca noticed something that stopped her in her tracks. While cleaning kennels in the morning, before her usual visit with Charlie, she observed him watching the younger dogs play in the exercise yard through his small window. For just a moment, his expression changed. The resignation lifted, replaced by something that looked almost like longing. That observation planted a seed in Rebecca's mind. She began to wonder about Charlie's past and what kind of life he might have lived before arriving at the shelter. Had he ever played? Had he ever experienced the simple joy of chasing a ball or tugging on a rope? The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that Charlie's apparent disinterest in play might not be natural at all. Rebecca started researching senior dog behavior and learned that many older animals who had been deprived of normal experiences could rediscover joy later in life with the right encouragement. The key was patience and the willingness to start slowly. She also discovered that play wasn't just about entertainment. It was crucial for mental and emotional well-being, even in elderly animals. Armed with this new knowledge, Rebecca began to form a plan. She couldn't change Charlie's past or guarantee him a future home, but she could try to give him something he had apparently never experienced. The challenge was convincing the shelter staff to let her try something different with their longest resident, a dog they had essentially given up on in terms of enrichment activities. Sarah was initially skeptical when Rebecca proposed her idea. Resources were limited, and they had tried various approaches with Charlie over the years without success. But Rebecca's gentle persistence and her background working with children who needed extra encouragement eventually won Sarah over. They agreed to let Rebecca try a new approach, though expectations remained low. The plan was simple but revolutionary for Charlie. Rebecca would introduce him to his very first toy. Not a hand-me-down from another dog or a worn-out donation, but something chosen specifically for him. She spent her own money on a soft, squeaky toy designed for senior dogs with gentle mouths. It was blue and yellow, colors that dogs could see clearly, and it was sized perfectly for a golden retriever to carry comfortably. As Rebecca prepared for this experiment, she felt the same nervous excitement she had once experienced before teaching a particularly challenging lesson to her students. She had no guarantee that Charlie would respond positively, but she was determined to give him this opportunity to experience something new. After 9 years of routine and resignation, it was time for Charlie to discover what he had been missing. The morning Rebecca brought Charlie's first toy to the shelter, her hands trembled slightly as she carried the small paper bag through the familiar doors. Inside was a soft plush duck, carefully chosen for its gentle texture and appropriate size. She had spent considerable time at the pet store, examining different options and imagining which one might spark something in Charlie's tired eyes. Sarah noticed Rebecca's nervous energy immediately. Over the past month, she had watched Rebecca's growing attachment to the senior dog with a mixture of admiration and concern. While it was wonderful that someone cared so deeply about Charlie, Sarah worried about setting up both the volunteer and the dog for disappointment. In her experience, dogs who had shown no interest in toys for years rarely developed enthusiasm for them later in life. Rebecca approached Charlie's kennel with more anxiety than she had felt in years. The old dog was in his usual position, lying with his head resting on his front paws, watching the morning activity with detached interest. She settled into her familiar chair and placed the bag on the floor beside her, not yet ready to reveal its contents. Instead, she began their usual routine of gentle conversation. She told Charlie about her morning walk, about the changing leaves outside, about anything that might help both of them relax. As she spoke, she noticed his ears perk up slightly more than usual, as if he sensed that today was different somehow. Dogs were remarkably intuitive creatures, and Charlie seemed to pick up on the subtle changes in her demeanor and energy. After nearly an hour of their normal interaction, Rebecca finally reached for the bag. She moved slowly and deliberately, not wanting to startle Charlie or create any negative associations with what she hoped would be a positive experience. As she unwrapped the toy, she continued talking to him in soothing tones, explaining what she was doing and why she had brought him this gift. The plush duck was even more appealing than it had appeared in the store. Its soft yellow fabric was inviting to touch, and it had a gentle squeaker inside that made a pleasant sound when pressed lightly. Rebecca held it up for Charlie to see, watching his face carefully for any sign of recognition or interest. For a long moment there was no reaction at all, and she felt her heart sink slightly. But then something extraordinary happened. Charlie's head lifted from his paws and his eyes focused on the toy with an intensity Rebecca had never seen before. It wasn't excitement exactly, but it was definitely interest. His nostrils flared slightly as he tried to catch the scent of this new object, and his body language shifted from complete relaxation to alert attention. Rebecca opened the kennel door slowly, having received permission from Sarah to enter Charlie's space for this experiment. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the kennel, placing the duck beside her rather than forcing it on Charlie. She had learned from her teaching experience that pressure often killed curiosity, while patience allowed natural interest to develop. Charlie's eyes never left the toy as Rebecca settled herself in his space. This was already more engagement than he had shown toward any object in years. She could see him processing this new situation, trying to understand what this thing was and what he was supposed to do with it. The concept of play seemed foreign to him, as if he had never learned the rules of this particular game. Minutes passed in silence as Charlie stared at the duck. Rebecca resisted the urge to encourage him or demonstrate how the toy worked. Instead, she simply sat with him, providing quiet companionship while he figured things out for himself. She noticed that his breathing had changed slightly, becoming more focused and alert rather than the deep, resigned breathing of sleep or boredom. Then, almost imperceptibly, Charlie began to shift his position. He didn't get up or move dramatically, but he adjusted his body angle so that he was facing the toy more directly. One front paw moved forward slightly, as if he was considering reaching for the duck but wasn't quite ready to commit to the action. Rebecca held her breath, afraid that any movement from her might break whatever spell was being woven. Sarah appeared at the kennel entrance, having heard the unusual quiet from this section of the shelter. She was accustomed to hearing Rebecca's voice during her visits with Charlie, and the silence had caught her attention. When she saw the scene inside the kennel, she stopped short. Charlie was more alert and focused than she had seen him in years, and there was something different about his entire demeanor. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was definitely real. Charlie's posture had changed from the resigned slump of an old dog who had given up to the more upright position of an animal whose curiosity had been awakened. His ears were forward rather than back, and his eyes held a spark that had been missing for so long that Sarah had forgotten it could exist. Rebecca continued to sit motionless, allowing Charlie to process this new experience at his own pace. She could sense that something important was happening, even though she couldn't predict exactly what would come next. The toy lay between them like a bridge to possibilities neither of them had imagined possible just an hour earlier. The morning sun streaming through the kennel window seemed brighter somehow, casting everything in a warmer light. Charlie's gray muzzle caught the light as he continued his careful study of the yellow duck, and for the first time in 9 years, the future felt full of potential rather than simply more of the same endless routine. 20 minutes had passed since Rebecca placed the duck in Charlie's kennel, and the atmosphere remained charged with quiet anticipation. Other volunteers and staff members had begun to gather at a respectful distance, drawn by word that something unusual was happening with the shelter's longest resident. No one spoke above a whisper, instinctively understanding that this moment was fragile and could be easily disrupted. Charlie had been motionless for so long that some observers began to think nothing would happen. His eyes remained fixed on the toy, but he hadn't made any move to approach it. Rebecca, however, recognized the signs of deep consideration that she had seen countless times in her classroom. Some students needed time to process new information before they could act on it, and she sensed that Charlie was working through years of learned behavior that told him not to expect good things. Dr. Emily Chen had arrived for her weekly visit to the shelter and joined the quiet group of observers. As she watched Charlie's body language, she noticed subtle changes that others might miss. His breathing pattern had shifted. His muscle tension was different, and there was an alertness in his eyes that she hadn't seen during any of her previous examinations. From a medical standpoint, this level of engagement was remarkable for a dog who had shown signs of mild depression for years. Then, almost without warning, Charlie made his first tentative move. He extended one front paw toward the duck, not quite touching it, but bringing his foot to within inches of the soft yellow fabric. The movement was slow and deliberate, as if he was testing whether this was really allowed or if someone would stop him from investigating this mysterious object. Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes as she watched this small but monumental gesture. She could see the internal struggle playing out in Charlie's movements, the desire to explore warring with years of learning to expect disappointment. His paw hovered near the toy for several long seconds before he finally, gently, touched the duck's soft surface with the tip of one toe. The contact was brief, just a moment of investigation, but it was enough to tell Charlie that this thing was different from anything he had encountered before. The fabric was softer than his blanket, warmer than the concrete floor, and it gave slightly under pressure in a way that seemed almost alive. He pulled his paw back quickly as if surprised by the sensation, then looked up at Rebecca with what appeared to be confusion. Rebecca smiled gently and nodded encouragingly, though she was careful not to make any sudden movements or sounds that might startle him. She had learned to communicate with Charlie through subtle gestures and calm energy, rather than the enthusiastic praise that worked with younger, more confident dogs. Her approach acknowledged his dignity while still providing the reassurance he needed to continue exploring. Emboldened by Rebecca's supportive presence and the lack of any negative consequences from his first touch, Charlie reached out again. This time he placed his entire paw on the duck, feeling its texture more thoroughly. The toy was warm from sitting in the sunny kennel, and it compressed gently under his weight. These sensations seemed to fascinate him, and he began to press and release his paw, discovering how the duck responded to different amounts of pressure. Sarah watched from the kennel entrance, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. In all her years at the shelter, she had never witnessed such a gradual, thoughtful awakening of interest in any animal. Most dogs either ignored toys completely or engaged with them immediately and enthusiastically. Charlie's careful, methodical exploration suggested a depth of thinking and feeling that she had underestimated. The next development came when Charlie leaned forward and gently sniffed the duck. His nose touched the fabric, and he took several deep breaths, learning everything he could about this new addition to his world. The toy carried scents of the store where Rebecca had bought it, traces of her own smell from handling it, and the clean, manufactured smell of new fabric. Each scent told Charlie something about the duck's history and purpose. As he investigated with his nose, Charlie accidentally pressed against the squeaker mechanism inside the toy. The duck emitted a soft, gentle squeak that made Charlie jerk his head back in surprise. For a moment, everyone watching held their breath, afraid that the unexpected sound might end this precious interaction. But Charlie's reaction was curiosity rather than fear. He tilted his head to one side, processing this new information about his mysterious companion. After a few seconds of consideration, Charlie deliberately pressed his nose against the duck again, this time clearly intentional about making it squeak. When the sound came again, his tail gave a barely perceptible movement. It wasn't quite a wag, but it was the first sign of genuine pleasure that anyone at the shelter had seen from Charlie in years. The sound of the squeaker seemed to awaken something deeper in Charlie's memory. Perhaps it reminded him of sounds from his distant past, or maybe it simply appealed to instincts that had been dormant for too long. Whatever the reason, the soft squeak appeared to be the key that began to unlock 9 years of suppressed playfulness. Dr. Chen made a note in her mental file about Charlie's response. From a behavioral standpoint, this interaction suggested that his apparent lack of interest in enrichment activities had been environmental rather than psychological or physical. Given the right stimulus and supportive environment, even senior dogs who had never learned to play could develop these behaviors later in life. Rebecca remained perfectly still, allowing Charlie to control every aspect of this interaction. She could see that he was building confidence with each small success, each moment of exploration that brought no negative consequences. The patience required was enormous, but she could sense that they were approaching something significant, some breakthrough that would change everything for this forgotten dog. The transformation began so gradually that at first, no one was certain they were really seeing it. After 45 minutes of careful investigation, Charlie had progressed from tentative touches to gentle pressure, from cautious sniffing to deliberate squeaking. Each small action built upon the previous one, creating a chain of positive experiences that seemed to be awakening something fundamental within him. Rebecca noticed the change in his breathing first. The deep, slow respirations of an old dog at rest had given way to something lighter, more energetic. Charlie's chest rose and fell with increasing frequency as his heart rate picked up, not from stress or fear, but from something that looked remarkably like excitement. His entire body seemed to be coming alive in a way that none of the observers had ever witnessed. Then came the moment that would be talked about at the shelter for years to come. Charlie, after pressing the duck's squeaker several more times and seeming to enjoy the sound it made, suddenly picked up the toy in his mouth. Not aggressively or possessively, but gently, the way a mother dog might carry a puppy. The yellow duck disappeared between his jaws for a moment before he set it down again, looking at it with what could only be described as satisfaction. The gathered staff members exchanged amazed glances. Charlie had just demonstrated play behavior for the first time in anyone's memory. But what happened next exceeded everyone's wildest expectations and brought tears to eyes that had seen countless touching moments in animal rescue work. Charlie picked up the duck again, but this time he didn't simply hold it. He began to shake, his head gently from side to side, making the toy dance in his mouth while it squeaked repeatedly. His movements started slowly and carefully, as if he was testing this new behavior to make sure it was allowed and safe. When no one stopped him or showed disapproval, his movements became more confident and rhythmic. For the first time in 9 years, Charlie was playing. The joy that radiated from him was unmistakable and infectious. His tail, which had barely moved in years except for the occasional polite acknowledgement of attention, began to wag. It started as just a slight movement, but as Charlie continued, To play with his duck, the wagging became more pronounced and enthusiastic. The sound of his tail hitting the sides of the kennel added a percussion beat to the soft squeaking of his toy. Rebecca felt overwhelming emotion surge through her as she watched this miracle unfold. The resigned, defeated dog she had first met was disappearing before her eyes, replaced by someone who remembered what it felt like to experience pleasure and fun. Charlie's entire face had changed, his eyes bright and alert, his mouth relaxed around the toy in what looked remarkably like a smile. Sarah found herself crying openly as she watched Charlie discover play. In her years at the shelter, she had seen many beautiful moments of healing and hope, but nothing had prepared her for the profound transformation taking place in front of her. This wasn't just a dog playing with a toy. It was a soul remembering how to feel joy after years of simply surviving. Other dogs in the shelter seemed to sense that something special was happening. Several had moved to the fronts of their kennels, watching Charlie with obvious interest. A few younger dogs began to play with their own toys, as if Charlie's newfound enthusiasm was contagious. The entire atmosphere of the shelter felt lighter and more hopeful than it had in months. Dr. Chen observed Charlie's behavior with professional fascination and personal delight. His movements were becoming more coordinated and purposeful with each passing minute. She could see muscle groups engaging that probably hadn't been used in years, and his overall posture had shifted from the hunched stance of depression to the more upright bearing of an engaged, alert animal. Charlie seemed to be experimenting with different ways to interact with his duck. He would pick it up and shake it, then set it down and paw at it, then pick it up again and carry it to different parts of his kennel. Each action appeared deliberate and joyful, as if he was making up for lost time by trying every possible way to play with his new companion. The most remarkable moment came when Charlie, in his enthusiasm, let out a sound that none of the staff had ever heard from him before. It wasn't quite a bark, but rather a soft, playful vocalization that seemed to express pure happiness. The sound was so unexpected and delightful that it drew smiles from everyone within earshot. Rebecca realized that she was witnessing something that went far beyond a simple play session. Charlie was experiencing joy, perhaps for the first time in his adult life. The careful, methodical way he had approached the toy suggested that this was all new to him. Not a rekindling of old behaviors, but the development of entirely new ones. As Charlie continued to play, his movements became more fluid and natural. The initial hesitation and uncertainty were fading, replaced by growing confidence in his right to enjoy this experience. He was learning that good things could happen. To him, that pleasure was allowed, and that he was worthy of receiving gifts that brought him happiness. The session lasted for over an hour, with Charlie showing no signs of losing interest in his duck. When he finally settled down to rest, he carefully positioned the toy between his front paws, claiming it as his own. Even in repose, his body, language remained alert and content, a dramatic contrast to the resigned defeat that had characterized his posture for years. Word of Charlie's transformation spread quickly through the shelter community. Volunteers who weren't scheduled to work that day began arriving to witness this miracle for themselves. The story of the 9-year shelter resident who had discovered joy through his first toy became an instant legend, proof that it was never too late for hope and healing. News of Charlie's transformation spread beyond the shelter walls faster than anyone expected. Rebecca had shared photos and videos of his first play session with a few friends, and those images quickly found their way onto social media platforms. The sight of an elderly dog discovering joy for the first time resonated with people in ways that surprised everyone involved. Within 24 hours of Charlie's breakthrough, the shelter's phone was ringing constantly. Local news stations wanted to interview Rebecca and Charlie. Potential adopters were calling to inquire about senior dogs, and donations were pouring in from people touched by his story. The simple act of giving one forgotten dog his first toy had created a wave of awareness about the needs of older shelter animals. Dr. Chen returned to the shelter 2 days after Charlie's first play session to conduct a follow-up examination. She found a dramatically different dog than the one she had been monitoring for years. Charlie's appetite had improved, his energy levels were noticeably higher, and most remarkably, he was continuing to play with his duck regularly throughout the day. The psychological benefits of discovering joy were translating into measurable physical improvements. The other dogs in the shelter seemed to be benefiting from Charlie's transformation as well, His newfound enthusiasm was indeed contagious, inspiring increased playfulness and energy throughout the facility. Staff members found themselves smiling more often as they went about their daily routines, buoyed by the proof that even the most hopeless situations could change dramatically with the right intervention. Rebecca had become something of a celebrity within the animal rescue community, but she remained focused on Charlie's ongoing development. She expanded their play sessions to include new toys and activities, always following his lead and never pushing him beyond his comfort zone. Each new experience built upon the previous ones, creating a foundation of positive associations that continued to strengthen his confidence. Local businesses began reaching out to support Charlie's story and the shelter's mission. A pet store donated a collection of senior-appropriate toys, ensuring that other older dogs could have similar opportunities for enrichment. A local photography studio offered free professional photos of senior dogs to help them find homes. Inspired by the power of Charlie's story to change hearts and minds. The transformation wasn't just about play, though. Charlie's entire relationship with humans had evolved since that first breakthrough day. He began seeking out attention from staff members and volunteers, something he had rarely done during his 9 years at the shelter. His tail wagged regularly now, greeting familiar faces with enthusiasm that had been completely absent before. Sarah watched these changes with amazement and growing hope. For the first time since Charlie's arrival, she began to believe that he might actually find a permanent home. The dog who had seemed unadoptable just weeks earlier was now demonstrating the kind of engaging personality that potential adopters found irresistible. The media attention brought unexpected visitors to the shelter. Families who had never considered adopting a senior dog came specifically to meet Charlie and learn about the benefits of giving older animals a chance. While not all of these visitors ended up adopting, many left with a changed perspective about the value and potential of senior pets. Charlie's story also caught the attention of animal behaviorists and researchers studying the psychological needs of long-term shelter residents. His dramatic response to his first toy experience provided valuable insights into the importance of enrichment activities for all shelter animals, regardless of age or how long they had been without stimulation. Rebecca found herself becoming an advocate for senior dog adoption. Speaking at community events and sharing Charlie's story with anyone who would listen, she talked about the patience required to unlock an older dog's potential and the incredible rewards that came from giving a forgotten animal a second chance at happiness. The shelter implemented new policies inspired by Charlie's breakthrough. Every long-term resident would now receive individual attention and enrichment activities designed specifically for their needs and interests. What had started as one volunteer's intuition about one special dog had evolved into a systematic approach to improving the lives of all the animals in their care. Charlie's favorite duck had become somewhat worn from constant play, but he showed no signs of losing interest in it or in the other toys that had been added to his collection. Staff members often found him rearranging his toys throughout the day, as if he was creating new games and scenarios to keep himself entertained. The most significant change, however, was in Charlie's eyes. The dull resignation that had characterized his gaze for years had been replaced by brightness and curiosity. He looked at the world around him with interest now, as if he had rediscovered his right to hope for good things and to expect joy from each new day. Veterinary students from the local university began visiting the shelter specifically to observe Charlie and learn about the connection between mental stimulation and physical health in senior animals. His case was becoming a textbook example of how simple interventions could produce profound results in animal welfare. As word of Charlie's story continued to spread, similar stories began emerging from shelters across the country. Other volunteers and staff members, inspired by Rebecca's success, started paying closer attention to their own forgotten long-term residents. The ripple effect of one dog's discovery of joy was creating positive changes for animals far beyond the walls of the Riverside Animal Shelter. 3 weeks after Charlie's first encounter with his yellow duck, a family walked into the Riverside Animal Shelter with a very specific purpose. The Hendersons had lost their beloved 14-year-old golden retriever 6 months earlier and had been heartbroken by the loss. They weren't looking for a replacement, but rather a companion who could benefit from the love and experience they had gained from years of caring for a senior dog. Margaret Henderson had seen Charlie's story on the local news and felt an immediate connection to his journey. She understood the special needs of older dogs and the unique rewards that came from providing them with comfort and security in their golden years. Her husband Robert was initially hesitant about taking on another senior pet so soon after their loss, but Margaret's gentle persistence and Charlie's compelling story had gradually won him over. When the Hendersons met Charlie, he was in the middle of one of his favorite activities, playing with his collection of toys that had grown considerably since Rebecca's initial gift. He looked up at the new visitors with bright, curious eyes, his tail beginning its now familiar greeting wag. The transformation from the dog who had ignored potential adopters for 9 years was so complete that Sarah had to remind herself this was the same animal. Charlie approached the Hendersons with confidence that would have been unimaginable just a month earlier. He carried his original yellow duck in his mouth, as if presenting a gift to these new people. Margaret knelt down to his level and spoke to him in the gentle tones that senior dogs appreciated, and Charlie responded by dropping his toy at her feet and looking up at her expectantly. The connection was immediate and mutual. Robert, despite his initial reservations, found himself smiling as Charlie gently nuzzled his hand. There was something deeply peaceful about this old dog's presence, a calm dignity that spoke of wisdom earned through experience. Charlie seemed to sense that these people understood him in a way that went beyond words. Margaret picked up the yellow duck and gently tossed it a few feet away. Charlie's response was pure joy as he bounded after his toy with an energy that belied his age. His movements were careful but enthusiastic, and when he brought the duck back to Margaret, his entire body wiggled with pleasure. This was not the behavior of a dog who had given up on life, but rather one who had discovered that life still held wonderful surprises. The adoption process that had seemed impossible for 9 years was completed in less than 2 hours. The Hendersons had come prepared with everything Charlie would need: a comfortable bed, high-quality senior dog food, and most importantly, hearts ready to love him unconditionally. They understood that adopting a senior dog meant accepting a shorter time together, but they also knew that those years would be filled with gratitude and contentment that younger dogs rarely displayed. Rebecca was present for Charlie's departure, and she struggled to contain her emotions as she watched him walk confidently toward his new life. He carried his yellow duck in his mouth, unwilling to leave behind the toy that had changed everything for him. The Hendersons assured her that the duck would have a place of honor in their home, understanding its significance in Charlie's transformation. Dr. Chen provided the Hendersons with a complete medical history and care recommendations for Charlie's ongoing health needs. She also shared her observations about his remarkable psychological recovery, emphasizing how love and mental stimulation had literally given him a new lease on life. The physical improvements that had followed his emotional breakthrough proved that happiness was indeed medicine for both body and soul. As Charlie walked out of the shelter for the last time, he paused at the door and looked back briefly, but there was no sadness in his gaze, only what seemed like acknowledgement of the place that had kept him safe until his real life could begin. Then he turned toward his new family and walked confidently into the sunshine, his tail wagging steadily. The drive to the Henderson home was peaceful, with Charlie settling comfortably in the back seat, his duck secured safely beside him. He watched the world pass by through the window with interest rather than anxiety, as if he understood that this journey was different from all the others. This time he was going to a place where he would be wanted and loved, not just housed and fed. The Henderson house was everything a senior dog could hope for. There were soft rugs on hardwood floors to cushion old joints, a fenced yard perfect for gentle exploration, and most importantly, people who understood that love came in many forms. Charlie explored his new environment with careful curiosity, marking important locations like his food bowl, his new bed, and the sunny spot by the living room window. That first evening in his new home, Charlie experienced something he had perhaps never known before: the feeling of belonging. He settled onto his new bed with his yellow duck tucked safely beside him, surrounded by the quiet contentment of a house filled with love. The Hendersons sat nearby reading and watching television, including him in their evening routine as if he had always been part of their family. Margaret later told friends that Charlie seemed to understand from the very beginning that this was his forever home. He showed none of the anxiety or confusion that many shelter dogs experienced in new environments. Instead, he adapted with the grace of an animal who had waited patiently for this moment and was determined to make the most of it. 6 months later, Charlie had become a local celebrity in his new neighborhood. Children would stop by the fence to see the famous dog who had learned to play for the first time at 9 years old. Charlie would greet them with enthusiasm, often carrying one of his toys to show off his newfound skills. His story had inspired several other families to adopt senior dogs, creating a ripple effect of second chances throughout the community. Rebecca visited Charlie regularly and was amazed by his continued transformation. The dog who had spent 9 years in resigned silence had become playful, affectionate, and confident. He had gained healthy weight. His coat was shinier, and most remarkably, he had developed a sense of humor that delighted everyone who met him. Charlie's yellow duck remained his most treasured possession, though it was now surrounded by an impressive collection of other toys. He seemed to understand the special significance of that first gift and would often bring it to visitors as if sharing the story of how his life had changed. The duck was worn and faded from constant love, but it remained the symbol of hope and the proof that it is never too late for joy to find its way into even the most forgotten heart. The Hendersons often reflected on how much Charlie had enriched their lives in return for the home they had given him. His gentle presence had helped heal their grief over their previous dog, and his grateful spirit reminded them daily of the power of second chances. In saving Charlie, they had discovered that he had saved them as well, proving that the best relationships are built on mutual rescue and unconditional love.